Hi, I'm Roman. I'm here today to share with you my bread making techniques. And the emphasis is on techniques because making bread, the recipe is pretty straightforward. I started making bread about 15 years ago just with a bread machine. And after about 7 years, I started making wine. And when I started making wine, I really started to understand the fermentation process. Understanding and knowing the fermentation process opened a whole new world in my bread making. And so I first adapted and started using Susan Tenney's Norwich sourdough recipe. And from there, I followed other recipes such as the tartine bread. And basically, the techniques that I'm teaching you today are following Chad Robertson's tartine country loaf. I've made certain adaptations. I've also grown my own wild yeast differently than the way Chad does, following more the way that Michael Pollan's book In the Omnivore's Dilemma. So the whole purpose of this is to motivate you to make bread on a regular basis, once, maybe twice a week, in an efficient manner so it's not overly burdensome. I hope you enjoy it. The first thing I do is I retrieve the leaven, or wild yeast as some call it, from the refrigerator. This leaven I've had for a couple years now. I actually cultivated this from Lincoln City, Oregon. We were up there on vacation, and I took a pad of paper and a pastry brush and went around to various places on the deck, on windowsills, and swept pieces of dust and debris and started this culture. It's been by far my best wild yeast leaven that I've created. I basically adopted that from Michael Pollan's book, where he talks about placing a sheet pan outside and generating a similar technique. I just didn't have the luxury of time of leaving a sheet pan out all day. So I kind of accelerated the process by using a pastry brush and by collecting it and then starting it. So the basic starter is 50% flour, 50% water, and taking from Chad's tartine recipe, it's 50% wheat flour and 50% white flour. If I make bread once a week, I do not have to feed this yeast. I can feed it immediately after I mix my bread, and it will stay in the refrigerator perfectly like this. So what I do to bring this up to room temperature is to take it over to the microwave, put it in the microwave for 10 minutes at the lowest power setting. So we've taken the leaven out of the microwave, brought it up to room temperature, and I've poured 680 grams of warm water. If you're making this for the very first time, the water is the variable here. I would say start at 630 grams of water. The dough will be much more manageable, and over a period of weeks or period of time of you making this recipe, kick it up another 20 grams to 650, then go to 670 to 680. In Chad's recipe, he uses 700 grams of water plus another 50 grams of water. And personally, I found that just to be too soupy of a mix, but it's something for you to try and use as a goal. I'm going to pour off 200 grams of leaven into the water. The important thing is to see how the leaven is floating. That is healthy leaven. If the leaven doesn't float, start again. And we use a Danish whisk to emulsify the leaven and the water all together into a slurry. Okay, next, zero out the scale and 100 grams of wheat flour. If you go a little bit over, not a problem, because you're going to add bread flour to it. So we're at 104, but our total amount that we're going to add is 1,000, because this recipe is based on baker's percentages, and so it's based on 100% of flour. Multiply it times 10, and you can do this whole recipe based on grams. So there we go, 1,000 grams of flour. Now we move this and place it into the KitchenAid mixer. Give it a little spray of water and turn our mixer on. Again, I'm using the water spray to keep the sides of the bowl wet. Next, while the flour, water, and leaven sit for about 30 minutes and the yeast has time to start digesting the sugars in the flour, we measure out the salt and we spoon out 20 grams, and we'll add that after about 30 minutes. The reason why we don't add the salt immediately is because salt will inhibit the yeast. It'll stop the yeast from doing their job. We're allowing the yeast to kind of get a head start on this whole process, and then we go ahead and add the salt. Right after mixing all these ingredients, it's really important to measure out the salt and have it sitting there on the counter, because more than once I've forgotten to put the salt in and the recipe just doesn't work without salt. Okay, we've waited about 30 minutes now. I'm adding the 20 grams of salt, the very last thing that we need to add. Give it a little spray of water and turn our mixer on. At this point in time, the tartine recipe calls for another 50 grams of water. As I mentioned later, I don't do that. I just find that it, for me, makes the dough too soupy. And we don't let the mixer run for very long, just a couple minutes to get everything mixed up. You're not necessarily looking for any particular consistency of the dough other than it looks like it's mixed up. So that's good. So we drop the bowl down, bring our hook out. At this point, dealing with a sticky dough, you can either run your hands under water or spray them down. We spray our bread scraper down, and now we just scrape the dough off the bread hook. Any crusties on there, just scrape them off. Okay, so our bread hook is clean. And now I can go around the bowl, scrape it, grab my scraper, and come in and get anything that's been dried or crusty off the sides, bringing it into the center of the mix. And we can see we have nice consistency dough. Remove dough from scraper. We cover, and you can place this off to the side, and you're trying to keep it somewhere around 70, 80 degrees. And in 30 minutes, we're going to come back and start the turns. Okay, it's been a couple hours. We've snuck in a couple turns since the last time, and good signs here. You can see the big bubble that's formed. That means the yeast is doing its job, and that it's changing the sugar into carbon dioxide. And so I come in, wet my hands, wet our bread or dough scraper, come in and separate the dough from the sides of the bowl. Okay, that's separated. And now I come in and grab and let go. As soon as I feel the dough starting to tear, I stop and I drop it. And I keep working it. We're doing this just gently. We don't want to beat or break up the dough. We like the bubbles that are forming there. My hand's getting a little bit dry. Come back and spray a little bit more. Just by tapping, some of those pieces of dough will break off. And so as I'm working the dough, what's happening now, I've gone through and done it once, you can see I can hardly lift it outside up above the lip of the bowl. And so that's telling you that you're getting close to finishing your turns. because the dough just doesn't want to stretch anymore. You've already exercised it to its limit. So see that? I can hardly lift it. So we're done here. So use your bread scraper. Get any excess dough off your fingers. Scrape. Squeegee the scraper. We're done here. And cover. So we keep it moist, it doesn't dry out. And then back into our proofing oven. And we're good for another 30 minutes or so. So it's been about 4 hours since we added the salt to this dough, and now we're about to set this up on the bench. So we'll just dump it out here. I give it a little twist, sometimes that helps to get it out. Relatively clean inside there, but we have a little bit that we can scrape out. And while it's doing the bench rest, it's a great idea in that 20 minutes or so to go ahead and clean your bowl, otherwise it gets pretty hard like paste or concrete. So now flour hands, put a little bit of flour on top, and we're going to divide this in half. And I'm pushing it away because it wants to come back and stick on itself. So just by rolling a little bit of flour underneath, I can go ahead and start forming a ball. So by using the scraper, I'm just sliding a little bit of flour underneath so it doesn't stick. It's sticky. Finish this edge up a little bit. All right. And so now we allow this to bench rest for 20 minutes. Okay, so the loaves are underneath this cloth. They've been bench resting for about 20 minutes. But what I forgot to tell you is Chad insists that this bench rest is an important step. I think the reason why is that after you dump the flour out, it gives you some time to clean your mixing bowl, because if you don't clean it right away, it ends up being like dried concrete. So so now we've got our 2 loaves, and flouring my hand, and we're going to separate these 2. And so now we start the folding process. So I flip that over, and it's floured on the bottom, and we're just gently separating it. And this can go a lot of different ways. I could fold it towards you, I could fold it away from you. So I'm picking it up and folding it about 1/3. Then I come to this side. And if this was really dry, I can go ahead and spray it. I'm using my spatula to help me lift up since it's so sticky. And then again, we're folding it on top. And then our last step right here, I can feel it's sticky. I fold that up. And there we go. So now, add a little bit of flour on top. And we're back to gently forming the bowl and bringing the surface in tension. And you can see how we're coming up really tight. Okay, so we'll just let that rest. So we prepared these baskets earlier with the half rice, half flour. And now before we place them in the basket. Because of issues that I've had previously of sticking, I'm gently flouring the edges of it and putting a nice coat of flour all the way around. And then gently flop that over and then drop it into the basket. Okay, we'll do that again. Especially the edges. Over and drop that in. And now, because it's so dry, some people will go ahead and put it in a bag or a wrap. And again, I just use a spray, wet the top of this so that it elastically can stretch while it's in proofing baskets. I'm just trying to wet. I'm being real careful not to hit the edges because that's going to make it stick to my mesh basket. So these are set to proof, and we go into the unused oven, and they'll proof 2, maybe 3 hours. We'll see how they're coming along. Okay, retrieving the clay baker from the oven. Been sitting there for 460 degrees F for about an hour. And now taking the proofed loaf and flouring my fingers so they don't stick to this, because that could be a disaster. Bringing my hands over to catch it and then dropping it in to the clay baker. Using the skive cut, and now we'll spray, wetting the top for our topping, and we've got some wonderful pumpkin seeds here. With a slight amount of pressure, I'm pushing them down, and again some more water to seal them. And let's cover this. It's on tight. All right, we're in for 20 minutes now. Okay, the bread has been in for 20 minutes, and now we can take the top off. As you can see, we got a nice oven spring. And we'll let that brown now for 16, 17 minutes. Okay, we're done. There's our loaf. So if you tap it on the side and then set it on the drying cooling rack, and then our second loaf is right here. You see the seeds. Over. And we've completed our baking for the day. Cheers.